Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is an important meeting because it was an opportunity for all of our colleagues to listen to and to ask questions about this process of shared services. This is an effort which was launched by the President's office to consider the ways in which we could take greater advantage, for example, of opportunities to buy at mass scale so that we are gaining advantage from economies of scale in what we purchase, lowering some of the costs of purchasing the goods that we need, of increasing efficiencies so that we can serve the university better and more effectively, and so that we can prepare for a future in which our resource constraints are taken into account as we think about how to organize these very important support services that make the university run. I'm very pleased today that we have our colleagues from the President's office, and I'm going to let Lisa Calisi introduce them to you. I'm going to be able to stay with you for 40 minutes, and then I have to run to another meeting, but it was important to me to be here. I've heard this presentation many times over, but it's important for me to understand how our community sees these issues. And so I'm really here more than anything to understand your observations and your responses so that we can have an effective implementation process for shared services on our campus. So with that, I give you Lisa Calisi.
Thank you, Chancellor. Good afternoon. Very happy to be here with all of you this afternoon to talk about, as the Chancellor said, a very important initiative which has potential for the university to bring us to the next level of achieving efficiencies. We are going to go through, I'm going to do some introductions and a few overview slides, and then I'm going to hand it over to David Nero, who's going to walk through the majority of the presentation. So with me, I have David Nero, who's the Assistant Vice President of Innovation and Operational Services, who has really been managing this project. And also with me today is Mark Preble, who some of you I know when you walked in greeted Mark. You may know him from his past experience on this campus, but currently is now the Chief Human Resources Officer for the university. So we'll go through the presentation and then we'll turn to questions and answers. So the presentation should be about 20-25 minutes, and then really want to hear from all of you. I think I just want to make clear from the beginning what's important to us is that we hear from you, which is why we're here and why we're doing these town halls. We have just completed a planning phase for this initiative. We're now moving into a design phase. So what is sometimes challenging for me when I stand up here is that we do not have all of the answers for that design or implementation, right? We have a plan that has recommendations and concepts, and so this dialogue becomes an important part of that listening tour as we move through the design and implementation phase. So I just have 2 slides, and then I will turn it over to David. So on the slide at the front of the room are some high-level charts that just try to express the context that we are operating in the higher ed sector, right? So these are probably trends that you are very aware of, that we have a shrinking demographic on the horizon, and we also have flat state support outside of their support for collective bargaining. So that impacts what happens from a fiscal perspective for the university. And given our limits on our ability to raise revenue, we have turned to efficiencies, finding ways to do business differently. And so today we're really going to walk through an initiative which we're calling the Shared Service Initiative, but it really is focused on 2 areas of operations: accounts payable and procurement. And so you're going to hear more about that in a moment. And so this is really a focused and a strategic effort for the university to make sure that we weather any of the economic storms or changes in demographics that are on the horizon. So as the Chancellor mentioned, right, this initiative is really, we get most of the savings, and David will show this in the presentation, from maximizing our economies of scale. We're a $3.4 billion operation. About $1 billion of that is in non-personnel spend. And so there are opportunities for us to maximize what we can get with our purchasing power based on how big we are. And so David, I'm going to turn it over to David, who's really going to go into the details of this. But I think the other thing that's important is this isn't just about savings. This is also about improving customer service and improving transparency, right? And so I don't want, just because I have the pleasure of being the Senior Vice President for Administration and Finance and Treasurer, what is very important here is also service delivery and transparency in how things are getting done. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and then we'll all sit up here and take questions at the end.
So I'm gonna get rid of this stool. I don't need the stool. I'm gonna use my own height. So good afternoon. As Lisa said, my name is David Nero. I'm Assistant Vice President in the President's Office, and I've been with UMass for a little over a year. And most of my time has been spent on working collaboratively with campuses on the shared services project that we've been, the term that we've been using. So I'm going to talk to you about two things primarily. We're going to talk to you about how the plan was developed, the activities that we did to develop the plan, and then ultimately I'm going to give you some insights into what is in the plan. And then, as Lisa said, we're going to be here for questions and answers. So I'm not going to read every slide. It's not my style. I'm really just going to try to articulate what it is that we're trying to say. So shared services is not a new topic. It's been around a long time. The private sector has been at it for a while, and higher ed has certainly been looking at it and has been implementing shared services in various forms. So when we talk about shared services, we talk about the definition being very much service related, very much customer focused, but including things like performance management, including things like process standardization, and taking advantage of technology where possible. And ultimately, as a system of campuses, we have the ability to harness our size and scale, and we have the ability to work collaboratively and develop a shared services model for functions within administration and finance. So typically what you're going to find in shared services, you're going to find a separate organization or a separate operating unit that's linked back to the customer through a governance structure. I'm going to talk about how we're going to do that. There's almost always service level agreements established between that operating unit and the customers. Again, very customer driven, very performance driven. So, it's really, as Lisa said, sort of taking our game and moving it up a notch and coming at some of our administration functions more as a system than specifically campus. I think we're going to run through the presentation.
Clarification question. Who is considered the customer?
So the customer is really everybody in terms of the campus community. So the customer could be students, staff, faculty. But it's a good question. We're gonna have ample time to talk about customers. So the planning phase, as Lisa mentioned, we're going to talk mostly today about accounts payable and procurement. But in the early stages of the project, we did include payroll in our analysis. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in the area of payroll. But we chose these areas for really, two key reasons. One, there's been some collaborative work already done in these areas that we have some foundation to build on. And when you look at best practices as a method of operating, these areas are typically areas that you'd find an organization to start in. They're repeatable, they're rules-based, they're measurable in many ways. They're low touch, so they're transactional based, even though there's some aspects that are more high touch. And there's high volume in many ways and savings potential inherently built into these functions. So this is a bit of an eye chart in terms of the content on this slide, but really what this is trying to articulate is the activities that we performed during the planning phase, which really started back in the late-ish summer. We really didn't get started until late August, early September. Our deadline or the target we were driving to was December, and ultimately we had a 1-month extension and finished the planning phase at the end of January. We started with organizing a team, and every campus was represented. We had 40 representatives across each campus join us together on a project team representing the 3 functions that we were talking about. And we went through a series of discussions about how do we do these functions today? Where might there be opportunities for us to work differently going forward? Where are there maybe areas of opportunity for efficiency? So we did workshops and we had various function-specific meetings. I think we're going to hold until the end for questions. So I know a couple of you raising your hand. I think it's just going to go better if I can get through the content. If you could just hold your questions, that would be great. So we did that in the early stages. We got folks together. We talked about these functions, and we collected and analyzed data. So we looked at who was doing what on the campus in support of these functions. We looked at our transactions. We looked at our spend. We also looked at benchmarks. So we looked at peers, but we also looked at others in other industries in terms of how they deliver these services. And maybe most importantly, when it came to the end of the planning phase, we looked at peers. And we looked at public higher ed systems, and I'm going to talk a little bit about who they were and what we talked to them about. And we learned a tremendous amount from listening to them and what their journey through shared services was in these areas. So we took a lot from what they told us and what worked and what didn't work and incorporated those learnings into our plan. So two more slides on peer analysis, because I think it's really important, and we were really pushed by the chancellors and the vice chancellors to make sure we were talking to peers. We did not want to be developing our plan in a vacuum or in isolation. So we looked at a variety of higher ed organizations. Those that presented to be the most like us in terms of size and scope were Maine, Missouri, Colorado, and Indiana. And they really resulted, the conversations with them really proved to us that they were mature in how they were running their shared services organization for their system. We did talk to Wisconsin, Illinois, New Hampshire. They're a bit earlier in their journey. So although we learned some things from them, we learned more from the mature systems. We talked to California, and California certainly is a massive public system and has made attempts to do shared services successful in many ways and unsuccessful in some ways, primarily because of their size and the scale of ultimately what they have under their university system umbrella. And we ended up talking to Yale primarily because we had a contact at Yale. They have been through a shared services journey themselves. We actually went and took a road trip down to Yale and spent a few hours there with them and talked to them and their staff about what they've done in shared services. So we really tried to explore several different organizations, but ultimately we ended up focusing on the mature public systems, Maine, Missouri, Indiana, and Colorado. The focus here, I want to reemphasize that the focus of our conversations with them was on accounts payable and procurement. So we did not talk to them specifically about what they do in the areas of payroll. So I just wanted to clarify that. And what we learned a lot and really tried to pull together this slide as a means of describing, what we heard and the themes that we heard from them. And we did it across 3 dimensions. So the organizational structure that we heard most was that they did create a separate operating unit. In the areas of accounts payable and procurement, they did have a system-wide chief procurement officer, and that all of the resources that were doing accounts payable and procurement reported to that chief procurement officer. We also heard strongly and proactively from them their emphasis on customer service. And you're going to hear me talk about customer service a number of times, and really what that means in the context of accounts payable and procurement are those people who are touching these services really in any way. Might be that you're someone who needs to purchase something and you need to ultimately work with your organization to get that purchase made. You're a customer. It's not just the folks within administration and finance who are doing the work, it's the people who are the recipients of the work. So really it's, again, students, staff, faculty, and we have external customers. We have folks the vendors that we do business with, they're a customer as well. So, we heard how important it was for these organizations to build customer service, a culture of customer service. And then from a staffing perspective, we asked them, how did you pull your organizational unit together? How did you bring your organization together? And typically they would say that they developed new job descriptions for the organization, that they took a lot of what they had, but they modified them in many ways, or in some ways they didn't need to modify job descriptions, but they took the opportunity to create new job descriptions for the folks that were going to work in this unit. They emphasized that they had, for the most part, the internal talent that they needed to run these services across the system, so they leveraged it. And when we asked them about, where does the organization, where does it exist? Where is it physically? So if you think of a state like Colorado, we weren't, was it in Denver? Is it in Colorado City? Where is it? And, each state really each system handled their location differently. In the case of Maine, they made a decision to leave staff on campus. In the case of Colorado, they made a decision to bring all of the resources into a single location. Missouri did a bit of a hybrid where they have 2 locations, and Indiana is a hybrid as well. So, it was very interesting to us to hear where people sat, where they worked, and there's pros and cons to each of those, and we're going to talk a little bit about our plan as well. So ultimately, really what happened through the course of the fall and into the winter was we took the inputs that we had from the workshops and the best practices, the experience in the peer systems and our data, and then we worked with a variety of governance groups. So the President's Council, including Chancellor Newman and the other chancellors, we were working with an advisory working group that had a few board members on it and members from, we had a faculty member and we had a provost. And so we wanted to hear from different perspectives other than administration finance. And then ultimately we had a steering committee, which was the vice chancellors of administration finance and the CIO for the university. And having meetings in town hall. So ultimately, we took all this content and we put together the plan. So next section here is really to give you the highlights of the plan. At the end, we're gonna share with you an update of the project and want to point you to the website that exists that has the full plan itself. But I have these are really the plan document is about 56 pages. This is ultimately about 10. So I've really tried to narrow it down for the purpose of this length conversation. So the key highlights or the key recommendations from what we developed into our plan was that we would establish what we're calling a unified procurement services team that would be run by a chief procurement officer that would have responsibility over accounts payable and procurement for the entire university. That team would provide services to all campuses. So this is a scenario in which we're saying, it really only makes sense for us to do this is if we get full campus participation. That we would establish a governance structure that is very customer focused. That we would create service level agreements and key performance indicators. And in the area of payroll, again, I'm going to talk much more about procurement and accounts payable. We put forth some recommendations to the steering committee that they pushed back on. And the steering committee really said, we're not ready to go forward with a shared services model in payroll. We have much more analysis to do. We have much more work to do. And so we are now in what we're calling a deep dive phase where we are getting much deeper into payroll processes and really understanding how payroll works at a campus level. And then we will ultimately bring new recommendations back to the steering committee in the summertime. So the key benefits we think from this plan, from this model are a responsive, consistent, high-quality customer service around accounts payable and procurement. Cost savings that's primarily achieved through leveraging our economies of scale and leveraging our new emphasis or an additional emphasis on procurement functions that include strategic sourcing, which is very much at the front end of the procurement process, and category management, which is more at the back end of the procurement process. So we have some information about the savings we feel like will be derived in a second. And we feel like there are professional development and growth opportunities through moving to this unified structure. Ultimately, this is a timeline that's going to stretch. We're in fiscal year 19, the tail end of fiscal year 19. We really think that this is going to take the majority of fiscal year 20 and ultimately will be wrapped up at the end of fiscal year 20 and into the early part of fiscal year 21. So this is going to take time. It takes time to do a project like this and a model shift like this. I want to talk more about the organizational structure, and I've got a few slides here. And this slide is not an org chart, first of all. It's an attempt to show today how the current procurement and accounts payable processes work from an organizational perspective. So really what we have is we have 6 separate campus-based procurement and accounts payable functions. And even within those 6 functions. We have three different models in which how these services are delivered. In some campuses, we have accounts payable under the controller, and in other campuses, we have accounts payable under procurement, for example. In the case of Dartmouth, Dartmouth does not run accounts payable. It's run through the president's office. And we have a level of several groups of governance: the Vice Chancellor of Administration and Finance, the controllers, and the Procurement Council, that are in place to collaborate, and they're in place to work together to look for opportunities. But there really is not sort of an overarching level of service that's provided across each campus. It's really more of an unstructured level of governance. So what we recommend is a future state that has an organization that's structured with really 4 main divisions. You would have a procurement operations division that is very much focused on the transactional side of procurement, rec to PO, contracts, assisting with campus transactions, bidding, vendors. You'd have a strategic procurement team, so a team that is focused on maximizing the spend, maximizing the sourcing opportunities for the university. You'd have an accounts payable travel team that's providing invoice processing, travel, bank card management for the university. And you would have a separate, included but distinct customer service team. So a team that is really devoted to making sure that the customers of these services are getting the information they need, they're getting responses to their questions, they're getting the help that they need, regardless of what campus you're working on or regardless of what it is that you're trying to do. And this is a graphical representation. This is, again, not an org chart, but it's more of a picture to show the organizational structure. The Chief Procurement Officer would report up to the Senior Vice President of Administration and Finance. We've got the 4 divisions. We show here the continuation of a steering committee to help guide directionally and decision-making that would need to be done from an organizational perspective, but also a customer advisory committee, so a group of people who are customers of the service. And theirs would be the strongest voice. Theirs would be the voice of, we need this. This needs to work better. We can be more efficient in these ways. We show customer service in a slightly different shade, well, not slightly different, a dramatic different shade, to show that we think customer service is a function that ultimately would expand outside of this group, that we would be providing the ability to provide customer service across more than just these functions. So we have to start here. This gives us the foundation, but it gives us an opportunity to expand. And I've got a couple slides to talk about the savings opportunity. And when we were deciding what slides to show here, we thought, let's just articulate, as Lisa mentioned earlier, we're a over $3 billion organization, and of that, and this is FY18 spend, about $1.2 billion of that is in non-personnel. So these are in things that we buy and pay for. And of that spend, if you look at the pie, the way it's broken out is that not all of that $1.2 billion is spend that we can really get savings from. The reality is that what we think is a little less than half of it is actually what's called addressable, or spend that you can influence by doing things like strategic sourcing and category management. So we don't set our target based on 1.2 billion. We really set it based on a combination of 581 million, which are the areas that we think the highest opportunities for savings are. And then there's other categories that have a lower potential for savings, and that makes up another a little over 300 million. And there's 313 million that simply is not spend that has any, we have no means of saving money from a procurement perspective. So these would be payments to the state, they'd be payments, internal transactions, spend that we run through our system that literally just has there's no procurement aspect to it. And really what that translates to, and this was work that we did with the extended time. So originally, again, I said our target was the end of December, and we went back and we asked for another month. And the reason we did that was because the chancellors in particular were challenging the savings estimates that we were putting forth back when we were presenting to them in December, and they wanted a much more precise and what they thought was a much more reasonable savings estimate. So we engaged in a spend analysis and came back with a midpoint savings of $13.75 million, which is a savings number that represents savings that we feel confident can be achieved through an emphasis on strategic sourcing and category management. Now, we as a university have a history through the Procurement Council in some strategic sourcing, and that has brought savings over the past 10 years. We feel like we won't be able to get more savings unless we change the way we run our procurement operation. So that 13.75 million represents the way you get there is by changing your delivery model. The $1.5 million is through operational efficiency, so it's through moving to a unified team. And then the $1.25 million is an estimate based on an accounts payable transaction or a mechanism of getting savings from discounts. So paying your invoices faster based on a negotiated discount with a provider. So you get 1% savings based on your invoice if you process it faster. So we think that there's some savings built into that. We get a little bit of savings today, but we feel like there's more to be gained here. So the timeline here, campus meetings. So we were at Dartmouth on May 1st. We were at Amherst on May 7th. We're here today. We will go to any campus and talk to anybody about the plan. So we've left that fairly open. We are working, and we'll get into the questions and answers. We're working to design this organization. So we're working through Mark and his team and with the HR directors from each campus and the procurement leadership. We're working to design this organization. We are recruiting a chief procurement officer. So that is out, and we are going to be looking at candidates over the next month or two, and hopefully we'll have hired a chief procurement officer by the summer. We are doing process and policy analysis. So we are not waiting. We are convening a transition team, and we are in the early stages of looking at our processes and our policies and looking for things that will be helpful as we get further on in the process. And the staffing of this Unified Procurement Services team, we think will take place over the months of September through December. So we get the leadership, chief procurement officer, the leadership team in place, and then the staffing in place over that time period. And the go live, if you will, is projected to be a 6-month transition starting in January and ending in June. So we are not proposing a big bang, everybody's in place at once. We're proposing a gradual shift to this model over the course of 6 months, starting in January. So that's it. I left my name and my email address there for anyone who wants to contact me. I mentioned we have a website. Mark's handing out a one-pager. Mark and Lisa are handing out a one-pager that we put out on May 1st, and we will do that at the first of every month as a means of communicating what's happening within this project. So please read it if you have advice or if there's information that you feel like is missing or if there's insights you feel like we should provide. We certainly are welcome to those. But for the purpose of talking about the plan, that's really the bulk of it. So we're at 2 o'clock. We have plenty of time. So I apologize for those of you who were trying to ask questions. Certainly now want to open the floor to questions and answers. So I think we have a microphone.
Yeah, we have 2 mics. One we're going to keep and one. Are they both the same? So can you guys just identify yourself by name and your department, just so we can put that in context as you're asking questions?
Oh, hi. My name is Martha Kelly. I'm a contracts administrator in procurement. And I had 2 questions. But the first one that I wanted to ask is, while you were in the middle of the presentation, when you talk about phase, I think it was phase 2 of the project, was that BPR, Boston, what is the business process redesign, was that phase 2 of the project? When you were talking about the planning phases.
So I can go back to, was it with the graphics, or I had the three blocks?
Yeah.
So
That's why it would have been a good thing, just to ask.
yeah, that's okay. So let me clarify. I think based on my perspective, when you ask about BPR, the business process redesign effort has been going on for a number of years across a number of different administration finance functions. In many ways, that work has really positioned us to have these conversations. We did not, through the planning phase, do business process redesign work. We need to do business process redesign work, but we didn't do it during the planning phase. That's now part of the process and policy analysis work that I made reference to that will start now.
Oh, okay. No, because I was curious as to whether the shared services is something that came after the BPR process. Like, if it was something that.
So I think these areas that we focused on definitely came out of some of the preliminary work and workshops that were held on the business process redesign, which is, I think, what the intent of this slide was. There was collaborative work and lots of conversations already happening across the staffs, across the university. So yes.
Now, my second question is, for those of us in procurement and AP right now, what's going to happen to us between the time frame of September to December when you're going to be staffing the new UPST?
So we're working on, it's on? Hello? So we're working on a plan right now, and we've been working with the various unions involved as well to, as David mentioned, we have a job description for a chief procurement officer, and we're also working on job descriptions for all of the other positions in the center. And as those position descriptions get drafted, we will share them with all of the impacted staff members. And although every job description will be different because the scope is different, many of the jobs that we're looking at are very similar. So we still have contract managers, we still have people who process accounts payable, and so we'll make those job descriptions available, and a method for anybody who's one of the impacted staff to express an interest in one of those positions. If you want, we're not involuntarily transferring anybody. Somebody might just decide, I'll transfer to some other place on campus. And so we'll keep track of that. And what we've said to the unions is, in a proposal that we made, we still haven't finished it, but in a proposal that we made, is we will talk to everybody who expresses an interest in any one of these jobs before we look outside. Because as David said, we think the talent's here. We just have to know who's interested and figure out a way to talk to everybody and try to match up positions. So that's our plan going forward. In the meantime, and I know it's difficult because we still have to keep all the trains running while we're doing this, but in the meantime, we need to just sort of keep going as we're going, and we'll keep everybody informed as decisions get made and as things change. Once we get a chief procurement officer, we think we'll be really ready to go. And we hope that between the time frame is September to December, that we'll really try to fill all these positions up. Okay? I don't know who's deciding here.
Hi, Annette Argyris. I'm an employee here, and I'm the president of the Professional Staff Union here on campus. Hi. This is less a question and more a comment. There's a couple, I think, assumptions that you all have put out as part of the planning of this that I think many of us would question from this campus. One is the low-touch nature of the work, and I'm hoping the folks here who do this work today will get up and share some of their stories about just how much high-touch work they actually do on this campus, having staff present on the campus to get to know what research we do, what specific needs we have, dealing with emergencies, actually doing really good customer service and fast customer service, and dealing with staff needs, faculty needs, and student needs is essential. And as I understand it, I'd be happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, part of the vision of this is to take that work off of our campuses and centralize it to Shrewsbury. So the thought, if some of your thinking, as I understand it, is that this is low-touch work, it can be done via email interactions, it can be done via a call center or a website where we can just email in with our problems. I think that's a faulty assumption. And again, I really hope those of you who do this work will get up and tell some of your stories. The second assumption that I feel is embedded in this, if I'm understanding it right, you put out a number of about 1.5 million in savings through efficiencies. Am I hearing that right, that that's elimination of positions?
Yes. We think, we think that when we first looked at all the staff members who are doing this work now, there's in the neighborhood of 70 or so. And we think that number preliminarily looks to be in the low 50s. So between now and when we fully staff, there's already been some positions that have been vacant. There's some positions in that list that are already vacant. We've heard other movement on campus, people looking for other jobs on campus. We think through a managed way, we can get to the number we need to get to through attrition and other movement on campus. We don't have any particular plan to wholesale lay anybody off, but it will be fewer people.
So, here's another one of the assumptions that I think may be off base from our experience here, at least talking from the staff perspective. I won't talk about sort of the managerial level. Maybe you could eliminate some jobs if instead of having a management system on each campus, that's all centralized. But from the staff, the frontline folks doing the work, we are already understaffed. We have already lost positions in these areas that need to be refilled. The workloads are already too high. And the response time is getting longer and longer because of that understaffing. So the notion that we can save money by taking this work and putting it all in one lump and somehow eliminating the direct line workers who do that work, I think is really faulty. We need more people doing that work. If you can save in other ways, God bless. We all know that there's financial crises happening across the UMass system, but eliminating the frontline workers is not the way to go about doing it. I'll let other people, because I saw other hands up, and if we have more time, I have some questions, some other questions.
Thank you for your comments. And I would say that the reason that we are trying our best to come out and talk to folks and hear from folks, and what we didn't say earlier is that if some of you have more detailed information that you'd like to share after the session, we will stay here so that you can share detailed examples. So if there are examples of good customer service that are used here on this campus, we want to learn about them. And the reason we're going through the process review in detail is so that we can understand that. On location, we are trying to minimize the impact on employees, and as far as location, no decisions have been made about the location of where staff will be. We have certainly studied models which has staff on campuses, not necessarily all co-located in one place, and so none of those decisions have been finalized. Again, we are in the design part of this, and that's part of the reason why we're here. I think we have to cluster staff, but does everyone need to be at one location? I'm not here saying that at all, but thank you for your comments.
I just want to add one thing too, Annetta, you probably know this, but the proposal that we made to the unions, because we haven't decided exactly the location of every position yet, is we do anticipate that in the short run, some positions will stay on the campuses. And the proposal that we made to the unions is for any position that is identified to stay on a campus, the individual who takes that position stays on the campus and stays in their current union, represented by the current collective bargaining agreement. So we're trying to, as Lisa said, we're trying to minimize the short-term disruption by figuring out as wherever we can to leave people where they are and even represented by their current union.
No, I was just waiting. Hi, Meta Kreutzmann, Mass Office of Public Collaboration, a center under McCormick Graduate School. Most of my questions, one, I want to echo what was just said. I am a frequent user of the frontline people and staff and getting help. I'm basically halfway live in the Quinn building, as most of you guys know who are here. My questions were mostly on if everything was going to be moved to Shrewsbury. So if that's not decided, then this is just a comment on that, I guess, and potential questions to come if that moves that way. But it's about access. I basically go and talk to people because it's the quickest way around. And that's very important to know that there's enough people in the either customer service unit, whatever that means, and how they're going to work with, and also training. How is that going to happen? Because it needs to happen on campus, otherwise people can't go to it. I can't go to Shrewsbury for a training, and I go to updated training all the time to make sure that I do things on my part to know how the system works. But a lot of it is a really heavy, what did you use? You said a high touch, very much so, and I get very nervous if there's not enough people. And there's the people who are currently working Quinn, they cannot run any faster than they're doing and have been doing. And I can't imagine that they can keep running at the speed that they're doing now. So please bear that in mind. We don't save on that, because if all of these things shut down, then we can't do our work on this end. So depending on the decisions and timing for that, I hope there will be another meeting. I do appreciate this type of meeting.
I want to thank you for your comments. A couple of things. The customer advisory board is critical for the success as we go through this evolution to a different operating model, right? I understand exactly what you're saying, and it is not our intent to resource this in a way that it cannot address the work need of the organization. So I would say we are going to be looking for representatives on that customer advisory committee. The other thing is there's service level agreements, right? So we talked about hopefully improved customer service, but also a level of transparency, right? Where we will be communicating what the service level agreement is for a certain type of work, which should be much more transparent to the customer. Now, I'm not saying you're not doing that today, but I think that best practice would say that there are ways for us to improve the level of transparency and the communication back to the customer so they know exactly where their request is in any point of the process. But we will definitely continue the dialogue. And I know there's going to be meetings happening on this campus that look at process. And so we're doing our best to make sure the right people are in that room, but certainly talk to managers on campus to make sure that we have the right people in that room. We have had examples where we haven't had all of the right people in the room. Our intent is to hear from you. So thank you.
I just wanted to comment once on one point about the training. So among the preliminary jobs we're looking at, that we're fleshing out and writing job descriptions for, is a whole training department. These are people who will all day long train people within the shared services center, but also train the users. So now, not necessarily in Shrewsbury, they'll take it on the road. So instead of people now having to take time out from their other work to train users, there'll be a group that will be primarily focused on just training.
Hi, my name is Darlene Gordon. I'm with Athletics. And my question is, you said near the beginning of the presentation that you were looking at accounts payable and procurement. And you're not looking at payroll at this point. You've kind of talked about it, but it's not part of the process at this moment.
Yep.
My question is, what other things potentially could be a part of shared services besides the three that you have up there?
So, and I just want to restate, or just add a little more clarification around payroll. We started this planning effort with each of those three functions really sort of in the mix in terms of what we thought we would bring forth. And and our analysis was that we were not ready on payroll. So payroll we're continuing to analyze. So it's still very much in our plans to try to put forth a plan. We have no other functions are currently in discussion from a shared services perspective. I think one of the things that the board has told us is if you're going to do this, you need to have a laser focus on a few areas. You need to do it really well. And if you can prove that you can do that well, then you can come and consider other areas. But right now we are singularly focused on these two areas in particular, but payroll certainly is very much still in the discussion.
So I'm Kelsey McCauley. I work in College of Nursing Science. Oh, you want me to stand up? Right? I'm part of the PSU, formerly of the CSU. So I have two things. One, in light of our current finance, HR, basically everything crashing today, are you planning on doing any sort of like online trainings at one point? Because right now I can't actively do my job because everything's down. And then two, if for whatever reason this plan does not work, what happens when it fails, or if it fails? I'm sorry, not when.
Certainly, we think that there's no single right way. We'll talk about training. There's no single right way to train people. Probably, if you poll everyone in this room, you would have different perspectives on how someone likes to be trained. And we certainly think that there are opportunities to do more virtual online training, but that does not replace the sitting side by side with somebody, because that, for many people, myself included, is really how you get where you need to be from a training perspective. I don't want to address the systems are down today. I'm not responsible for that, and I don't want to speak to that. I guess from a what if the model doesn't work, certainly we have to consider the alternatives to this model not working while we're building the model. And, I frankly am not putting a lot of time into thinking about that, but I appreciate you mentioning it, because it's important that we probably do need a contingency plan.
Hi, Janelle Quarles. I work here, but I'm also the president of the Classified Staff Union. I'm just kind of trying to get my head wrapped around efficiencies. I mean, when we say we're looking at 1.5 efficiency, and you're creating now a position in the overhead that's going to look at other positions that are created and deal with other campuses, how are we looking at billing as far as what the campuses use? Who's going to be absorbing that cost? Are we really saving money if we're going to get billed every time you have to call Central for something? We know there are always going to be problems. Also, with the positions that we've established that you're looking at laying off existing employees on campus only to have them reapply for jobs that they were currently doing if they want them in the future. And I guess that's off campus and on campus that you're going to do that. What is the significant changes to these positions that required them to now reapply for the same positions?
So on the cost of the organization, the savings that is no longer on the slide, that was up on the screen, is a net reduction in cost, right? So it basically looks at, you build this new model with assumptions, you look at your current model with its existing staffing pattern, you compare the two, and that's a net reduction. The way in which that savings will be experienced by campus is a methodology that we are still working on. The Vice Chancellor of Administration and Finance are currently discussing that. And as soon as that is finalized as part of this design process, happy to share that. But we're not at that point. So UMass Boston will see a reduction in cost from this new model through the efficiency part, and then what we believe through the procurement part as well, which was the first part of the savings. So I'm going to let Mark answer the other part of the question about the impact on employees.
So, although every job will change in some ways, as I said, there'll be jobs that will look very similar. So we still need contract managers, for example. We still need people to deal with pro cards and travel. But the scope will change because it will be system-wide. And there'll also be other positions. So, because what happens now is you might have somebody who is an accounts payable clerk within the controller's office who manages lots of different things. We'll have positions that will be different. I mentioned training before. We'll have training. We'll have customer service. We'll have reporting. There'll be different types of jobs. So the idea of the current staff expressing an interest in one of the positions is to allow the staff to decide, oh, gee, I'd like to focus on training. Maybe somebody is a contracts manager who spends a lot of time training anyway, and so maybe I'll just focus on training. And so that's sort of the idea. And we're really trying to work with the unions now so that we don't end up just announcing that all these people are going to be laid off unless they find another job someplace. We're really trying to find a smooth transition to help folks identify positions they might be interested in, and then we'll start to go through that process to match up the staff with their interests. That's the idea.
Shauna Manning from the College of Liberal Arts, and I had a question about how things are shifting around, and with the money, it sounds like there's going to be a new kind of bureaucracy created. I can't think of a different word right now. But anyway, I was wondering, what is the salary range going to be for the chief procurement officer? And you're talking about having a training group, and there's going to be a couple of people under the chief procurement officer. It just seems like money's being shifted, but I'm not entirely convinced yet that's going to be a savings. But so will all of the new staff or these new positions that are being created, will they be union positions or will they be non-union positions? And then what is the salary range you'll be offering the chief procurement officer?
So we're working with a search firm right now on developing the pool for the chief procurement officer. So we don't have a specific salary for that position yet. In terms of the other positions, some will be non-unit, some will be unit. What we're trying to do is, there's 9 unions involved in the impacted staff across the campuses. It would not be particularly efficient for us in the long run to have all 9 unions continue to represent the staff. We can't pick one, and so we've actually signaled to the unions that we would enter into a so-called neutrality agreement if there was a union that wanted to represent the entire staff. But we can't just say, oh, the CSU will represent everybody. So, but there will be a certain level of non-unit positions like there is now. Our proposal in the sort of midterm is, as positions vacate, so let's say somebody takes a position in the short run and they stay on campus, they stay in the CSU. As that position vacates, which could be a year from now or 8 years from now, that position would be transferred and would become either non-unit or if there's a union that represents that group. So the idea is to try to, in as orderly way as we can, come up with one cohesive group, but in the short term to minimize the disruption by letting everybody stay where they are.
I'd just like to have a follow-up on that. Can you give us the target range for the salary for your CPO?
It's really going to depend on the candidate.
Then how did you find out that $1.5 million number if you don't know how much you're going to pay your top guy?
Yeah, so the overall estimate is based on benchmarks from what we have seen from different peers, the overall savings. But the preliminary budget for planning purposes had the chief procurement officer between $180,000 and $200,000.
I don't want to take seconds before everybody else gets first. So if anybody else has questions. This is Annetta again. In another one of those presentations that you've done on another campus, you guys had put up a slide that broke out where the spending is on the highest saving potential. Do you have that slide with you by any chance?
So it's in the report, Annette?
Okay.
In the report.
Well, one of the lines in there is for professional services. And if I'm remembering correctly, it showed that throughout the university as a whole, we're spending about $140 million a year on professional services, including these management consultants. I just wanted to have people think about that number and think about the total dollars that you're trying to save in this. So We've experienced a lot of these management consultants at UMass Boston. How many of you have experienced a lot of these management consultants at UMass Boston? So we've been through these, and in some departments multiple times, as leadership has changed here. I've got to say, they are mostly a massive waste of time and money. Our time, your money. And if we're spending $140 million on that system-wide, just eliminating a tenth of that gets us pretty close to 16.5 million, gets us to $14 million. What other steps are being taken across the system to really do way more serious due diligence on how money is taken out of sort of our pockets in terms of the staff doing the direct work and given to private interests where they're making profit off of this? I mean, we know how to do our work. And having managers come and talk to us about what needs to change and what needs to improve and how to do that is something worth doing. But bringing in these outside consultants who get paid a lot of money, who don't have knowledge of these campuses and don't really know our work, seems to us to be an enormous waste of time and money. So I'd love an answer to like what else is happening beyond this, because there are clearly places where significant money could be saved in the system. Anyhow, just wanted to raise that issue.
So thank you for your comment. I know you all understand that the budget formulation process is at a campus level, right? So that discussion, and some of you introduced yourself to me when you walked in the room as a member of a budget planning task force. And so all of the decisions about the choices a campus makes or a department makes on what they're going to spend money on or how they're going to use resources is done by that individual campus. So what this activity and this new approach, Unified Procured Services team, should help do is to make sure that we are getting the best price, we are getting the right level of competition on not just professional services, but all services. So I appreciate your comment, but those decisions, the base investment of money in professional services is driven at a campus level.
Hi, my name is Agnes Schmidt. I'm working in procurement. I'm one of the lucky winners who is on probation period during this transition with more than 20 years of procurement experience in the humanitarian era. And I'm just wondering, based on the comment and your reply, that how I would question any requisitioner or budget holder choice. Would we have a new policy so I can question why we would need this consultant? I'm preparing contracts for a month with like very interesting amounts, and total fees could be seen with very interesting conditions. And I'm just wondering, would I have the right to say to our budget holder that we would not make a contract with this supplier because I found another one on the market on a half price? How I would have the authority to do so?
So the way in which these teams work on strategic sourcing is there is an understanding by commodity or by service what the university would need. And then you would expect this organization to go out and competitively procure those services or use state blanket contracts, which I know you probably are also involved in. And so it's through that process that we are hopefully getting the best price, but the actual decision to purchase it is still going to be a local decision, right? But the pricing should be driven by a competitive process.
Yeah, but right now, Bybase is set up not like Oracle PeopleSoft. We are not, the requisitioner is not doing a blind requisition. The supplier is already linked in the requisition.
So that's an example of a process that we need to look at, and we need to address the authority issue and ultimately come up with the right combination of what's the role of the procurement team and what's the role of the department, and ultimately get the department what they need at the best price in the most efficient way. So the way things currently work are, from a system perspective, in many ways are not the way that we would design them for the future state. So that's an example of an area that we will explore.
Okay, I have the mic here, I'm sorry. Martha Kelly again from procurement. My question to you is, what is the plan for the transition with the old staff going out and the new staff going in? Do you expect some level of cross training in between? What's your transition plan looks like between us, the staff that are currently in this position, and the new staff that is coming into these positions?
We think fundamentally it's going to be the same people.
Can I give a shot? I think you're asking about how do we effectively get move from the way we're doing business today to the way we're going to do business in the future. Is that right, or was Mark?
It's also about, am I expected to train somebody that's going to be taking my position?
Yeah, I think the reason that we've spread out the implementation is because we acknowledge that there's a lot going on in these areas, and for us to think that it's all going to happen at like literally on January 1st is an example of how we would fail, frankly, if we tried to do that. We acknowledge that. So we are currently laying out how we might transition. For example, maybe accounts payable invoice processing. This is not necessarily the way it will go, but for example, maybe accounts payable invoice processing and vendor management and travel and expense would be the first services to transition to the new team. So we would then stagger other things to happen over the course of that next 6 months. So we are like really right now, what we're doing is we're designing how that would work. And having conversations with folks like this is going to give us, it's the start of getting insight into effectively how we get from one model to the other. It will be tricky because every day the transactions don't stop. I've done this work before. You can't necessarily say, well, give us a month and we'll come back to you when we're ready. You have to have a plan to keep the business running. So that's part of what this work is really between now and the end of the summer, is to actually come up with that VR detail plan that's going to step us through that. But it's a really good insight. Oh,
Hi.
sorry.
I have the mic. I'll pass it over, though. This is Darlene again. I know that part of the plan has to do with an RFP that's gone out regarding the credit cards or the travel cards that are going on that will affect the entire system, correct?
So there is a current procurement process led out of the Treasury Department, which centrally has procured these services for all campuses. So yes.
Okay, so my question is, for that process, are you going to have folks at the table like athletics? Because sometimes we're not at the table, and I know that our coaches use that a great deal, and then our student athletes deal with meal money and
so
on.
Darlene, you're I think sharing with me that you missed, there was a extra call-in, campus-wide call,
Okay.
university-wide call for people to participate in to make sure that we were hearing from athletics, because this came up on other campuses. So afterward, I will make sure I get your contact information and have someone reach out to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Ethel. I work in the police department here at UMass Boston. I'm wondering how the cost savings will be realized at UMass Boston. For instance, the people in procurement who do our work now and the people in our accounts payable, their salaries are cost here. Will the cost of the centrally done work be allocated back to the campuses by dollar amounts of purchase orders, by numbers of purchase orders, by enrollment? I'm just assuming it's going to come back to us somehow. I'm wondering how does this help us?
So I think I answered in an earlier question that we are currently working on that methodology, but you're right, there will be a methodology to share in the cost, right? Because today these costs are borne by UMass Boston and UMass Amherst, UMass Lowell, and all the campuses. Tomorrow there will be a new cost, which we anticipate being lower. UMass Boston will share in that cost, but the methodology is currently being worked on, and as I said earlier, happy to share that once the vice chancellors across the university come to an agreement on how we would do that.
Hi, Meta Kreitzman again. I just went on the website page that's listed on the, and I noticed that you have a place to submit questions, and also you put your email address. Good luck with that one. But is there a way to, because an FAQ that you already have on there is usually frequently asked questions, doesn't necessarily mean every question. So my suggestion is we can submit questions, but that you put the answer to every question, because we all hear and learn from each other and also across the campuses. So that that would be really, really good.
Yeah, those evolve over time. Just, a question that we answer might, there might be a slightly different answer as we get deeper into the process, but we're happy. Frankly, that's easy. Those things we can do that are easy, and we can make sure people are, if you want to subscribe to this, we can put measures in place so we proactively push information out. So absolutely.
All right, I got a pedometer on. Hi, my name is Jamie Scott, and I work in the College of Advancing and Professional Studies. And there's a lot of information here, and I know that you can't capture everything on a few slides. But I'm curious to know, because you've highlighted that budgetary decisions are campus-based, correct? So I see $16.5 million as a savings, so there's some sort of budget in mind. And Ellen asked about how that was going to be shared. But my question really is, as we talk about, is it really about efficiencies? And if so, what was the project here? What made you decide on these three areas as far as, because yes, I believe efficiencies are important. I think changing things systemically are important, but also identifying misappropriation is important, or budgetary issues is important, especially when you're talking at a system level. So my curiosity, and maybe sort of an offer to sort of look into that, is that you mentioned other colleges that were similar to ours. So I'm curious to know, did they have the same sort of issues that our colleges have? So I just kind of really want you to identify why you chose these areas, because if it's more about efficiencies, I keep hearing about savings, right? So, and that's like a systemic thing. But we have individual efficiency issues campus-wide, right? Each campus, so.
So I think we started in these three areas because I think in our conversations and in our sort of look across the system, these are areas that we thought, based on knowing that we had 6 of each, that we thought they would be good candidates for moving to a shared services model. So it was really based on understanding at a fairly high level how we do things today. There was also work done back in 2011 that made the same recommendations. In addition to those recommendations was the recommendations of replacing the procure to pay technology, which led to the Byways acquisition and implementation. So that was really the big activity that came out of that 2011 report. The recommendation to do shared services was never acted on. And so I think, when Lisa started and then she hired me, we sort of just took a fresh look at that and said, let's get back into those conversations. I think the efficiency and cost savings go hand in hand. I mean, ultimately, you don't get to the cost savings without really taking a look at what you're doing and how you're doing it across the entire system. But we also acknowledge that each campus is unique, and the needs of each campus are unique. So we can't generically create an organization and just make everybody sort of conform to the way the organization is going to behave. It has to be designed in a way that has as much local knowledge as we currently have, but is able to take advantage of the scale more than we can take advantage of it under the current model.
So the objective was more about efficiencies and not cutting or looking for savings.
I would agree with David. I think they go hand in hand, right? Oftentimes, and the majority of the savings is coming from changing the model that we use under procure to pay, right? So that is actually going to allow the whole university to take advantage of economies of scale, which we believe will result in lower cost. That cost will be experienced on every campus through that.
So maximizing on PeopleSoft and what it can do for your...
It's actually making sure that we have procurements where we have wide competition, and then when folks are looking for those goods or services, they are channeled through to the contracts that have those best prices, right? So it's on, as David said, it's on the front end, making sure that we are maximizing our size and getting the best pricing we can, and then it's also making sure that anyone that then buys goods or uses those services also takes advantage of that hard work that was done on the front end. Now, David said in his remarks, a lot of this work has been done. The Procurement Council, UMass Boston has been a member of the Procurement Council. We have achieved savings by working together, by putting out bids strategically together. This is bringing that to the next level, and I would say that part of the reason we ended up here is because of the experience that we have already had by working together. This really is about taking the talent we have and bringing this to the next level so that we can get more savings. On your comment about kind of other opportunities for efficiency, I would say that there are many efforts. I'm here to talk to you about one initiative, right? And we happen to put together a comprehensive plan working with colleagues from across the university. There are many other initiatives underway by probably many of you in this room trying to eke additional efficiency because of the climate that we are operating in. This is not to disparage any other idea or any other work that's being done. Hopefully this is additive and gets us to a next level, as David said, of a process that started around 2011, before 2011, if the first report was done in 2011. But
We're still using the same systems in place, like the byways and the marketplace and all the things that we're using. This is all going to be a part of your plan.
I think through the process work and the policy work, I think we may use functionality in those systems differently because every campus is not using the functionality the same way, right? So it makes it harder to get at those efficiencies. So I think when we talk to our peer systems around the country, what we heard was, wow, you guys are really lucky that you already went to Byways, right? That you implemented that, because when they stood up a shared service environment, they needed to get to a common platform. The university had the forethought to do that, right? We are on one financial system and then one procurement system that is attached to that financial system in PeopleSoft. So we have the technology. So the good news is, right, and I mean this sincerely, because I've only been here 2 years. The folks that were working on this prior to my arrival set a great foundation for us to now achieve bigger results. Because without that foundation, we'd be having a whole different conversation. So, credit to the folks that started this process to get us here. So thank you.
Hi, Janelle Quarles again. While I don't really expect you to have an answer on this now, I'm thinking about a lot of things that were said earlier, going back to when systems fail and, what are the real efficiencies. When you paint us a picture this way and it looks at the bigger picture and what we want to see in the long run, that's fine, except human error, it happens all the time. And a lot of our members, a lot of your employees who work in these academic departments, I see a couple of academic chairs here. I don't know how many faculty you guys are going to reach with this type of information because it is so very relevant in what they do and how it affects the people in that department. Human error happens all the time. I know for a fact that people go to procurement, go to comptroller all the time with different things that they need addressed right away. We mentioned the on-site training and things that change within, the pro card and whatever. So this is, when you constantly have to refer back to a central location and you don't have the unique issue that's happening, and oftentimes they need the problem fixed right away, right? So this is something that is going to seriously negatively impact a campus like this, where you have these different things. You have a lot of non-tenured faculty. You have a lot of faculty who travel, a lot of student groups that put on events that have to go through procurement. It's really something that you need to be mindful of and how it's going to impact the faculty here, the staff and everybody else, because they cannot have that fix that's needed every day, that we see every day in these offices.
Make a note of that. So the handout, did we talk about that?
So hopefully we brought enough copies of this one pager. This is a new attempt on behalf of my team to try to create something that is short and hopefully easy to absorb, which gives folks a status of where we're at. We're going to use a consistent format, and the commitment I'm making is that we're going to put this out there monthly, right? So we're due to put one out at the beginning of June. It will be an update from this as to where we are in all these areas. Because what I have found as I go out to campuses and talk to folks, not anyone's fault at all, but sometimes the information hasn't gotten to all the right people. So we're hoping that if we have a website that we can direct folks to and have these quick updates, and we do this on a regular basis monthly, that it'll allow you, if you see something, to say something and ask the question and email my friend David here, who is very, very good at putting himself out there. And we want to hear from you. As I said, we do not have all the answers. We do not have a design lockdown. We're getting, and we got some great feedback from you today that will factor into how we go forward. So I just want to thank you all for participating, and really look forward to hearing from you and working with you. And hopefully some of you are engaged in some of these detailed process discussions that we now need to go through as we solidify a design for the organization. But thank you. We'll stick around if anyone wants to have a sidebar conversation about a more detailed example that you didn't want to ask through a question.